So one of the things that I really like about your framework is you introduce some terminology that is not as common as maybe it should be. And one of the things is customer journey is by far and away a hot topic. Employee journey, I don't hear that very often. Not in terms of an initiative in and of itself. So customer journey, customer mapping is big. I have a preference for customer stories as a means of getting to understanding the process changes and the technology changes and where people interact both, from an actor's perspective, both from a customer and an employee. But the focus on improving the journey for the customer is removing friction, personalizing experience, introducing simplicity, all with this kind of monomaniacal focus on improving conversion, amplifying engagement, getting better data insights. But you have a different focus on the employee journey. You've already made, I think, very much a solid case for how one needs to have a different perspective on this and how it affects CX. How do you approach defining, documenting, activating employee journey?
So I believe, first of all, I'm so happy to hear employee journey and that there's some focus on that.
That's awesome.
And hopefully there'll be more and more of that. I believe that as a team, that people are not a team just because they work together. They're a team because they respect, they trust, and they care for each other. They have each other's backs. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I heard. Also, I've been interviewing people who worked for my dad starting when they were 17. And we're talking decades ago. And that was something that he said to me that really hit me. He said, we knew your dad had our back and we had his back. We worked collectively as a team, and he was there to support us with whatever we needed. He said, you just tell me what you need. I will support you in any way I can. I'm going to teach you everything I know for you to improve. And so this was a part, when you think about the employee journey, this was a very important core value, a philosophy towards your employee's journey, for them to know along the way that you have their back and that each other has their back. And so I really believe that this E3+1 recipe that I created is a solution to the cost, labor churn. It's just that speaking food wise, churning, we think of butter, right? So Are we making butter or are we making a business? We want to minimize the cost of that turnover. And so this roadmap that I created to become the employer of choice came about because I think the first step is, once you've reestablished or reclarified your core values, vision, and mission, once you've made sure that the employee experience is integrated and is an integral part of that, so that you can apply it throughout your operations and your processes, no matter what that is. And so the first step, just very briefly to highlight the roadmap, which ultimately simultaneously increases and improves your attraction and retention on both sides of your people side of the business. So the first E is educate. Mm-hmm. So don't train your people. People are like, what do you mean don't train? Of course we have to train our people. Yes, but before you spend the time, the money, the resources in training them on the task training, the skill training to perform that job, the functional training, before you do that, you have to first educate them on who you are, what the company is about. What service or product are you delivering? How do you want that delivered to your customer? What is it? What does your brand mean? What is your brand promise? How do people feel that brand promise? How do they experience what that is? So these are things that have to be done from an educational perspective, not just a skill set or functional training. Mm-hmm. That's the nutshell of what education is.
I would imagine that in this particular process, Joe, there's a lot of engagement that you have with executives in those businesses to really tease out what things are truth and what things are spoken. There's a great Buddhist phrase that says something to this order. It says, be careful what you think, because what you think will impact what you say, and be careful what you say, because that will impact what you do, and be careful what you do, because that will tell people who you really are. And so when you're talking to a group of people to go through a process of education that sets an expectation of who we are, it's incumbent upon the leadership to really be walking that path. People are looking at their leadership and saying, is that something that they truly live out inside of the business with customers, with ourselves internally? What do they say to customers? And then what do they say to us about customers? These are single moments of truth inside of an organization. And I would imagine for you, Jill, as a consultant going in, your antennae are probably on max awareness when you're going through this process of education. Am I right?
100%. And as I mentioned before, it's really my DNA. So whenever I go into a business or a meeting and I'm speaking with someone, I'm hearing what they're doing, I also like to experience as a customer their business and what's going on. And I just naturally, because of what I've grown up with, because of all the experiences, I observe, and I'm very detail oriented, and that's been hyper honed with my fashion design and my food styling, my other things. But I naturally I hear, I see, I use all my senses. I feel, I can pick up on so many details going on around me. Sometimes it makes my family or people with me like a little annoyed.
It's a lot of information.
I pick it all up and I like, I want to comment on it. But when I am helping a company, it is very important to really make sure they are walking the walk and to see what they're doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And in the same way, I can't help it, but I keep, I think of employee experience first. But as you mentioned, with the customer, and they want to feel and see that your brand leadership is congruent with what they've been told your brand is supposed to be about. Well, think about from the employee side of the equation. How are they going to feel if they're being told, as you said, this is the way you should be treating your customer. This is the way you view your interactions with them, your promises, etc. And they themselves are being treated poorly. And they're not, the leadership is not using the exact same, highlighted processes and details on how to pamper and kind of kid glove and help your customer. If they're not having that same experience, they're going to feel like, well, this is totally incongruent. They want me to do that, but they're treating me like this. Like, forget it. That's just not going to wash, and that's not going to sustain, and it's certainly not going to be a scalable, thriving solution or method.
So with your framework, does it result in, I can only imagine there's a lot of documentation of particular customer facing roles and like what that journey needs to be, not only just to drive the KPIs that the business really wants to have and should have, but the experience that the customers have. Is this part of the output that you have from your consultation?
Yes. So the second E is engage. And that's all about, what does it look like? So how do we take this education and then put it into action? And that's, looking at, again, I would never come into a company and say, this is the way you do it. And that's part of the reason why I call it a recipe, besides my food background. With any recipe, you have the basic ingredients, you have the basic methodology, the steps, right? But to make it uniquely yours and give it your flavor, and in this way, it would be, what is the unique brand promise of your company? What's the flavor you want your culture to be, so that your customers are feeling you different from the other competitor who's delivering the same service or product, right? So taking that recipe, imparting your own flavor into those things, and engaging with your people first, shoulder to shoulder, like you mentioned before, right? Like you have to be there willing to do everything. Like the ex-employee, told me from my dad's experience, don't expect them to do something you as a leader is not willing to do yourself. And so getting in there, engaging with them and showing them the way of how to engage with their end customer. And so when I work with people, I look at what they're doing already. And from an outside perspective, with having this kind of multicultural, multi-dimensional perspective, I'm able to say, okay, let's look at what's working, where are we getting the best feedback, what might not work, and what might be happening in another industry that I've experienced that could really work well for what's happening in your environment already. Because I think it's people get very myopic. The tunnel vision is based on this tunnel of what has always been done in our industry, what's always been done in our company. And we need to think outside the box. If nothing else, design school taught me how to think outside the box, how to look at a problem from a different angle to come up with a solution.
I see that your design methodology is adaptive. And so you can judge the recipe and have a different flavor profile, but it's still going to taste good.
Exactly. I love that. Yes, 100%. And at the end of the day, just to, I guess, finalize the recipe for all the some people won't wonder, well, what are those other E's? The third E is entrust. So again, you can't just start with entrusting your people. You have to, that's why it's a process. That's why you have to start with starting with your core values, vision, and mission, but starting with educating, then engaging with, and then once you've done all of these steps and things involved in those two first E's, you are free to entrust your people without you micromanaging, without you being there to follow through and have ownership for their job, for their company, not saying it just as a job, but true ownership as their voice in a company, that they feel empowered to make decisions on their own for the betterment of the company. And what better way to then also relieve upper management or an owner of a company, depending upon the type of business you're in, to free you to then, I was going to say, go working on your company, not in your company. Is so many, I've heard from so many people now since the pandemic. They are like, I don't have time, where I have to be in the company because of what's happening with the labor shortage. But this will resolve some of that labor shortage. You will become the employer of choice by creating this culture that attracts people to you. And not only can you be working on your business, not in your business, how about the concept of actually taking time to live and be with your family, take vacations, like just gain your life back. So, I mean,
that's culture.
The benefits are across the board and enormous. Yeah, they're priceless.